Granblue Fantasy Relink has given us a roadmap of what to expect until May, but many are wondering what's coming after that. What if I told you there will be an all-new difficulty with several new raid bosses for us to farm? The next Granblue Fantasy Relink announcement stream is going to be on April 25th, which is likely when they're going to hint at this new difficulty and address that concern. Before we hop into what type of bosses you can expect to see, let's start with why I think this new difficulty is coming. First and foremost, they've repeatedly stated that Granblue Fantasy Relink will not be a live service game. This was done to set the expectations that we won't be receiving many updates post-launch and give them an out should the game not meet their sales expectation. We've already got 3 updates announced leading us into May, and I believe the last big update for Granblue Fantasy Relink is going to be the impossible difficulty, and I predict that's going to come somewhere around July. I don't know about you guys, but me personally, I've been having a hard time finding any type of motivation to grind out Lucilius without there being a confirmation of more content to come that I can use these enhanced sigils on. We're also set to receive 3 new characters, which in my opinion would be pointless if there isn't any new content for us to farm with those characters. This is why, in my opinion, the writing is on the wall that we'll receive one last big patch with several different raid bosses for us to take on, and it only makes sense for that to be a new difficulty. They stated this is not a live service game, and we've already gotten 3 patches back to back each month, and so just why say that if you're going to continuously give us patches? I think we're going to get one last big one, and then they're going to put the game down and maybe sprinkle a boss in every few months. Now, I say that the expected release date for this would be around July, but I can easily see a scenario where it's teased in this April announcement stream with an August-September release date to bring players back to the game and give them an incentive and enough time to grind and max out the new units to prepare for the next difficulty. So me personally, I plan to main Tweyen, and I'm gonna max her out anyways, but it's really gonna push me harder to get all of the Lucilius sigils that I need for her if I know that there's a new difficulty coming a few months away. And the reason I go with a few months away is because that same logic needs to apply to Sandlaphon when he comes out in May. I just want to take a break to say that I really appreciate you guys for showing all the love on the Granblue Fantasy Relink content we've released so far. So I really would appreciate it if you can help me get this video to 100 likes and subscribe to the channel, but let's get back into the video. Now that we've discussed the why, let's discuss what to expect with this new impossible difficulty. And for those of you that don't know, I'm going with impossible because that's what it's named in the mobile game. But to get into it, with Lucilius being level 200, many people expected there to be a level cap increase eventually, but that won't be the case. A level cap increase would make sense if Cygames wanted to continue to have frequent DPS checks, but with the impossible difficulty, I feel like we're moving more towards knowledge checks instead of DPS checks. We've seen this with Lucilius where there are several phases within the fight that require the entire team to have an understanding of the mechanics, or the chances of clearing that fight become slim to none. This is the perfect way for you to make challenging content without just having every ability one-shot you, and chances are the abilities are one-shotting you anyways, but to build on top of that and make it even more difficult, now we have knowledge checks within the game with actual boss fight mechanics. That being said, there's also DPS checks in the Lucilius fight, but they require strategic timing of your Skybound art and not just something you can clear with your DPS skills. That mechanic in itself is a knowledge check, and I think this is going to be the formula going forward for all future content in Impossible. They've already given us 3 free DLCs, and I don't think this Impossible expansion would be free. I think this is going to be the first paid expansion to the primary game, similar to Monster Hunter World when they got the expansion pack of Monster Hunter World Iceborne. When it comes to bosses though, there are several that they can pull from the Granblue Fantasy mobile game, and as far as I can tell, there hasn't been any pattern of what they've pulled already. Now, one thing that would be a massive letdown is if now from here on out we only got one boss every few months. I feel like the Impossible game mode can't come with only one boss, and so here are my predictions of the several that I would add to give us a solid new difficulty to satisfy everyone's urge to keep playing. You've been warned, I'm gonna say probably all of these names wrong, so don't judge me in the comments. But to start off, we're gonna get into the Ultima Gods. We already have one of the Ultima Gods Piet A, so I expect them to give us the other 2 to complete the trio, Artie Ninja and Grianoth. For the 3rd raid, Cygames likes giving us multiple bosses to fight in one, so I can see us receiving the Huolong and Quilin raid, where we'll fight 2 Pegasus-like creatures, one being of the light element and the other being of the dark element. The next prediction would be for us to receive the 6 Dragons raid. This can be a little bit debatable because we already have elemental dragons within the game, but to my understanding, these aren't the dragons that are included in the 6 dragons raid from the mobile game. The plan could be to evolve the current dragons into the 6 dragons from the mobile game with the newer difficulty and give them a different moveset as well as a slightly altered appearance, similar to how they did with the Ultima bosses where they were just all purple and slimy and had purple based attacks of whatever their like regular abilities were in their original forms. In the mobile game, these dragons drop weapons for their element, which with some additional buffs could be the same for Granblue Fantasy Relink, but they're gonna have to really think about those buffs to make it actually viable and competible against the Terminus weapon. Now to do that, they can formulate the game in a way where these elemental weapons would be necessary to clear future raid boss content, giving us a reason to farm them and also have that second option towards the Terminus weapon. Now that is the list that I have. There will be some of the easier farmable bosses and impossible that we would need to repeat over and over and over to farm materials, sigils, and the weapon to take on the last few bosses. And these last few bosses, I feel like they aren't going to just release them all at once with the impossible difficulty. We're probably going to get one every few months, and I feel like they need to rotate these based on their elements, which is going to give viability towards getting the elemental weapons from the dragons, so that way you have the type advantage as you're taking on this boss. But I guess now that I'm thinking about this, I've already written out the script, but I'm sitting and I'm thinking, I'm like, wait, I think the War Elemental Sigil just bypasses that theory in itself. So yeah, throw this idea out the window, actually, all 6 dragons. That makes no sense. Cygames, I can't do the job. You've already gave us a broken sigil. You're gonna have to think of another way to formulate this content to lead us into future bosses. I have faith in Cygames though. They're probably already thinking now of crack things to put in these, such as sigils, maybe another type of weapon just with different effects than the ones that I described. So I'm not gonna sweat too much on it. But these last few bosses do need to be even more difficult in the sense that there isn't just one optimal build that you need to clear it, and farming the other bosses has a viable reason. This would allow for replayability using different builds on these last few bosses and move us away from all of the characters requiring the same type of weapon and the same type of sigils to be quote unquote optimal. As I mentioned earlier, I don't expect these bosses to be released all at once, and these are likely going to be something that's dropped every few months, except for one potentially dropping with the Impossible expansion pack that's going to clearly be difficult and require you to clear all of the previous bosses to build up the sigils as well as get the weapons to clear that final boss. I don't have any predictions on which would come first, but these are the 4 bosses in the selection pool that I predict that they will pull from to wrap out the content for Granblue Fantasy Relink. This would make for a perfect ending to raid content for Granblue Fantasy Relink and leave the game in a very satisfying state. Of course, they would sprinkle a few new characters into this DLC progression plan to expand the roster and keep the game lively. With hints from Cygames, I've been able to predict the first DLC character, but if you want to see the rest of my predictions, I'll have that video linked right here for you to check out. Thank you guys for your time, and I'll catch you in the next one.